The war was all but lost. The Galactic Alliance, a coalition of the most advanced civilizations in the known universe, was on its knees. The Croth Dominion, a race of brutal conquerors, had crushed every line of defense, tearing through fleets and strongholds like they were made of paper. The Alliance had fought with their most powerful weapons, plasma cannons, particle disruptors, and AI-guided artillery, yet nothing worked. The Croth commanders, wrapped in their impenetrable energy shields, walked through the battlefield untouched, leading their forces with brutal efficiency. Every battle ended the same, the Croth advancing, the Alliance retreating. And then, there were the humans. The newest members of the Alliance, barely 2 centuries into space travel, considered primitive and outdated by their allies. Their ballistic weapons, projectile-based and seemingly archaic, were laughed at. Plasma rifles had long replaced traditional guns in the rest of the galaxy, rendering kinetic warfare obsolete. At least, that's what the Alliance believed. They mocked human military history, calling Earth's old warriors relics of a barbaric past. Names like Chris Kyle, Carlos Hathcock, and Vasily Zaitsev were footnotes in an old, forgotten playbook. Snipers. Against shielded targets. You might as well throw rocks, an Ardentian strategist scoffed. The idea of using bullets in an interstellar war was seen as a joke, a desperate relic of an inferior species. The final battle was approaching, and with it, the end of the war. The Alliance's last stronghold stood on a desolate world, its defenders barely holding on. The Croth warlord leading the charge was invincible. His personal shield, fueled by energy absorption technology, had withstood everything thrown at him. Plasma blasts, missile strikes, high-frequency disruptors, nothing could break through. If he wasn't stopped, the Alliance would fall. Desperation led to strange decisions. That's when Sergeant Jack Carter stepped forward. A veteran sniper, long ignored by his alien superiors, Carter had spent most of the war sidelined. But he had been watching, studying, waiting for a moment like this. "They're using energy absorption shields," Carter said, loading a heavy, black rifle as he spoke. "They're built to counter plasma, energy-based attacks. But shields like that don't stop pure kinetic force." The alien commanders dismissed him at first, barely suppressing their laughter. The idea of using a crude human rifle against an enemy so technologically superior was ridiculous. "This isn't a fairy tale, human," one of them sneered. "No lone soldier is going to turn the tide with some outdated weapon." Carter didn't argue. He simply set up his rifle. The moment he did, the mocking quieted. It was unlike anything the aliens had seen, long, heavy, with a matte black finish that had seen 100 battlefields. Not sleek like their energy weapons, not efficient by their standards, but built with purpose. The round he loaded was no ordinary bullet. It was a custom-built, armor-piercing, depleted uranium-tipped projectile designed to tear through anything in its path. He took his position. The aliens watched in silence now, their amusement fading into something else. Disbelief. Maybe even fear. Carter didn't care. He only needed one shot. Carter lay motionless, his rifle steady, his breath slow. The battlefield stretched before him, a wasteland of fire and smoke. The Croth warlord stood at the center of it all, towering over the carnage, his shield shimmering with raw energy. The target was over 3 miles away, a near-impossible shot even under perfect conditions. But this was far from perfect. The wind howled, the atmosphere was unstable, and gravitational fluctuations made calculations unreliable. No AI assistance, no guided targeting, just Carter, his instincts, and decades of experience. The aliens still didn't believe. A Zalari officer, one of the so-called military geniuses of the Alliance, shook his head. "This is foolishness. No projectile can reach that distance accurately." Carter ignored him. He wasn't aiming yet. Not really. He was reading the battlefield, calculating everything, the subtle shift in air currents, the slight distortions in the warlord's shield, the rhythm of his movements. The Croth warlord raised his arm, signaling his forces forward. If he wasn't stopped now, the battle, and the war, was over. Carter's finger tightened on the trigger. He exhaled. The rifle thundered. The shot cracked through the air, a hypersonic round slicing through the battlefield. The aliens tracking it saw only a blur, too fast for their sensors to fully process. The warlord's shield flared to life, expecting an energy blast, only to be met with something it was never designed to stop. A pure, solid round moving at velocities no shield algorithm had been programmed to counter. The bullet hit with a force beyond comprehension. The first impact sent a ripple through the shield, destabilizing its energy matrix. The second impact, the warlord's skull, was instantaneous. A split second ago, he had been invincible. Now, his head ceased to exist. The Croth froze. Their leader, the terror of 1,000 battles, was gone. Not defeated in glorious combat. Not outmaneuvered by superior technology. But erased, with one ancient, outdated, human bullet. Silence consumed the battlefield. No one moved. No one breathed. The impossible had happened. Carter exhaled slowly, chambered another round, and spoke without looking up. Next. For a moment, no one knew what to do. The battlefield stood frozen in time, thousands of soldiers, both Croth and Alliance, staring at the lifeless body of a warlord who was supposed to be invincible. The shimmering energy of his shield flickered, then collapsed entirely, leaving behind nothing but a corpse with half a head. Then, chaos erupted. The Croth forces recoiled, a ripple of uncertainty running through their ranks. Their empire was built on dominance, on fear, on the absolute certainty that their leaders could not be touched. That certainty had just been shattered by a single shot. Soldiers hesitated, looking to one another, waiting for new orders that would never come. On the Alliance's side, the disbelief turned into something else, momentum. For the first time in the entire war, the enemy had flinched. Carter's shot had done more than kill a warlord. It had cracked the foundation of the Croth's psychological warfare. "Take the shot," Carter said, not as a suggestion, but a command. The other human snipers, who had been dismissed as obsolete relics, now understood exactly what they had to do. One by one, they set up their rifles, each selecting a high-ranking Croth target. The next shot came from the east, another tungsten round punching straight through a Croth officer's armor. A heartbeat later, another. Then another. The Croth line collapsed. Panic set in as their commanders fell one by one, each killed in ways they had never even considered possible. Their soldiers, so used to fighting under the protection of their leaders' impenetrable shields, found themselves leaderless. Disoriented. The Galactic officers, once so dismissive of human tactics, finally understood. Plasma weapons had been useless against these enemies, but kinetic force, simple, old-school physics, had turned the tide. "Deploy ballistic teams," an Alliance commander finally ordered, the hesitation in his voice gone. Now. Every human sniper on the battlefield took their position, and within minutes, the war had changed. The Croth, once unstoppable, now scattered. Some ran, breaking formation in blind fear. Others tried to regroup, but without their leaders, there was no coordination. The Alliance forces pressed forward, taking ground that had seemed lost just moments ago. Carter loaded another round, his face unreadable as he surveyed the battlefield. He had spent years being ignored, dismissed, ridiculed. Now, the same commanders who had laughed at him were watching in stunned silence, waiting for his next move. He adjusted his aim, found his next target, and fired. War's not over yet. The battle was over in minutes. What had once been a hopeless, one-sided slaughter had turned into a full-scale retreat. The Croth, for all their might and advanced defenses, had no strategy for an enemy they had already dismissed as irrelevant. They fell back in disarray, their formations broken, their numbers dwindling. Alliance forces advanced, cutting through their ranks with renewed ferocity. What had seemed like an inevitable loss had turned into the greatest military upset in recorded history. The warlord's death had shattered the illusion of Croth superiority, and now, for the first time, they knew fear. Carter slung his rifle over his shoulder, stepping down from his perch as the last echoes of gunfire faded. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of Croth officers, each one marked by a single precise shot. Around him, the once doubtful alien commanders struggled to process what had just happened. An Ardentian officer approached, still gripping his plasma rifle as if unsure whether it was even useful anymore. He looked at Carter, then at the smoldering remains of the enemy's last stronghold. "We've been fighting them for years," he said, voice low. "Nothing worked. Not once." He glanced at the human's rifle. "How?" Carter exhaled, lighting a cigar with steady hands. "They planned for the future," he said simply. "We reminded them of the past. Across the battlefield, human snipers collected their weapons, their work done. The other Alliance soldiers, once dismissive of them, now watched in silence. They had seen an entire war turn with a single bullet. Word spread fast. Reports flooded through the Alliance's ranks, each one repeating the same impossible truth: an old human weapon had broken the unbreakable. Tactical doctrines were rewritten overnight. Ballistic weaponry, once considered primitive, was now being researched by the most advanced species in the galaxy. Human snipers, once ignored, were suddenly in high demand. And the Croth. They never recovered. Their empire, once built on the idea of untouchable dominance, was now crippled by paranoia. No warlord, no officer, no soldier could step onto the battlefield without knowing that somewhere, unseen, a human sniper might be waiting. Carter watched the last of the Croth ships flee into the dark void, the war finally over. He took one last drag from his cigar before flicking it to the ground. "Funny thing about legends," he murmured. "Sometimes they come back." He turned, walking away as the Alliance forces secured their victory. Behind him, a single spent bullet casing lay in the dirt, a relic of the past that had just shaped the future.